Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Contender series here at CFI. My name is Sterling Hedgpeth. I'm the programming manager for both the DocLands Film Festival and the Mill Valley Film Festival. And you have been watching The Dissident. And joining us today is the director and co-writer, Bryan Fogel, who also won an Oscar a few years ago for Icarus, which was, as you remember, about the doping scandal in international sports, especially the Olympics. So, Bryan, thanks so much for joining us.
Good to be talking to all of you, and thanks for having me.
Before we talk about the film, I just wanted to ask, are you still in touch with Omar and Hatice, and how are they doing?
I am in touch with them constantly. I probably message with both of them. I mean, multiple times a week. Um, Hatice, until the pandemic, had just moved to Washington, D.C., where she had got an apartment to continue her advocacy work for Jamal, and then essentially went back to Istanbul at the start of the pandemic and has been there since. So hopefully she'll be able to return to the States at sometime in the near future to pick up where she left off. Omar is in Montreal in Canada. He is still under the protection of Canadian intelligence, but they've both been very pleased and feeling optimistic with the film coming out. If you look at their Twitter feeds, I mean, the two of them are constantly being attacked by the Saudi flies, trolls. And so that has remained consistent, but they're both just brave, incredible people, and honored that they trusted me to tell their story.
And it's a powerful story, powerfully told. So thank you so much for sharing it with us. I think just for starters, I mean, obviously we're dealing with social media misinformation. We're dealing with the fourth estate and the attacks on it. We're dealing with lots of different issues. What motivated you to approach this topic? When did you get involved? And obviously, turning around a documentary is no easy feat, given how long sometimes it takes to make them. So you turned this around really quickly. What were your reasons behind it, and what were the challenges around that?
Following Icarus, which kind of, when I was finally free to really start thinking about another project, was after the Academy Awards in March of 2018. And, having went through that very humbling experience, and for me, um, the accolades were really secondary to the work behind the film protecting Gregory Rodchenkov, bringing the story forward, and then the action that came from it. I mean, actually seeing change come from it, and in protecting Gregory Rodchenkov, I mean, here's a guy who still lives in hiding under protection. 4 years into him coming to the United States. He's just been granted asylum, but he has a target on his back, and it made me feel kind of a responsibility, a burden, I guess, as I would call it, to continue to tell stories that I felt could have change in the world, that could have impact, that could fight in dark corners. And as the story of Jamal Khashoggi's murder unfolded in those first 2 weeks of October 2018, and I think, hundreds of millions around the world were riveted and appalled by this shocking atrocity. The idea that a journalist, a Washington Post journalist, could walk into his own country's consulate to be so horrifically murdered while his fiancée waited outside for their wedding papers. Um, just felt outrageous to me. And what compelled me was there was a narrative going on as Jamal's story was unfolding, that this guy was Muslim Brotherhood, that he was a terrorist sympathizer, that he was a supporter of ISIS, that he was friends of bin Laden. And as I start reading his writings and his articles in the Washington Post, and then bring on Arabic translators to help me, understand more about what he had been writing and his books and his interviews, because he was a constant presence on television. I didn't see that at all. I saw a moderate. I saw a guy who was wanting his country to be a better place for everyone to live. It was a guy who was advocating for women's rights. It was a guy who was advocating for freedom of speech and thought and freedom of journalism, and saying that I love my country and I have no problems with Mohammed bin Salman. I have no problems with the monarchy. But the direction that we're going, where we're locking up people and jailing them or beheading them for speaking an opinion, is not the right direction of our country. And for that, this guy was murdered. And that made me want to try to tell his story. And the variable for me became very early on is whether I could build the trust of Hatice, his fiance, and have her provide me with, her evidence and story, and whether or not I could build the trust of Omar Abdulaziz, because as his story was breaking, I saw in him the protagonist. I saw in him, why we would care about Jamal through this young Saudi fighter. And then, of course, the Turks. And if the Turks would trust in me to provide the evidence, the video footage, the surveillance footage, the interviews, the transcript, so that I could hopefully craft a story that wasn't going to feel like a piece of archival news, because, of course, Jamal couldn't speak for himself, but rather feel hopefully like it was the untold story, behind this murder, but also the human rights abuses that are happening within Saudi Arabia.
Now, the access you had earned eventually was very, very impressive. What were some of the obvious and maybe not so obvious obstacles that you had in terms of accessing both Omar and Hatice and the Turkish police and the Turkish government, but the UN, Washington Post, all these other major players?
Well, as I decided, anytime you take on the idea of, a documentary, right? And for me, where I was looking at something where there was real unfolding events that were and are still happening, there's, a nimbleness that needs to come with that, like that you're willing to embed, that you're willing to spend whatever time that is needed to cover that story. And right as the Saudis admitted that Jamal had been murdered, the first call I made was to the Washington Post, and Fred Ryan and Marty Barron and David Ignatius and Shane Harris and Jamal's editor, Karen Attia and Fred Hyatt. They were all, very welcoming, and said, hey, if you want to come to Washington, sit down, meet with us, tell us what you need, and we'll try to help you as best we can. And so I was in Washington, I think it was about October 22nd. I mean, just, a couple of weeks after Jamal's murder. And that let me know, okay, the Washington Post is going to help me. The next connection was to Hatice. We spoke for the first time beginning of November through a translator. She was not willing to participate in that time. She was, obviously completely overwhelmed. I mean, it was just heartbreaking. And she invited me to come to Istanbul and said, she'd be willing to take a meeting with me. And so, I went there. It was probably, I think it was around November 10th. And I spent the next 5 weeks in Istanbul, not filming, not with the crew. I went with Jake Swantko, my producing partner. And we met with Hatice probably 10 times, at least 15 times. And it was just emotional. It was just saying, hey, look, I know that this is a terrible situation that you're in, but if you allow me to tell your story, I'm going to fight for you. I'm going to fight for Jamal. I'm not here for a day. I'm not here for a week. I'm not here for a month. I mean, we'll go on this journey for as long as we need to. to help tell your story and to follow this story and to follow your fight to seek justice. And beginning of February 2019, she was speaking for the first time leaving Turkey. She'd never been to Western Europe. And she had started to learn a little bit of English. And she was speaking for the first time in front of the European Parliament. And she said, "Okay, Bryan, if you want to meet me in Belgium, in Brussels, we can start." And that was the journey that I went on with her. I mean, I think of her as my sister now. I mean, it was, when you go through something like that with somebody, it was a lot. And she's just incredible to see her courage. And with Omar, went to Montreal, introduced through Thor Halverson, the Human Rights Foundation. And Human Rights Foundation backed the project in full, which was incredible. And Thor, because the Human Rights Foundation hosts the Oslo Freedom Forums every year, they had actually had Jamal at their forum in May of 2018 with Iyad al-Baghdadi, who appears in the film, and Omar Abdulaziz, they had been talking to. And Thor introduces me to Omar. It was the same kind of thing, like, okay, I can't, I'm not ready for this, but you want to come to Montreal, I'll talk to you. And I was there. I actually went there right before going to visit Hatice in Istanbul the first time. Spent about a week the first time and just said, "Look, Omar, if you'll let me just start filming and start capturing this raw emotion that you're going through, every time after we film, I'll leave you with the camera cards. They're all yours. You don't have to agree to anything right now. I just want to be able to have this moment if we decide that we're going to work together." And he agreed. And 6 months later, after, at that point, spending a couple months in Montreal, Omar handed all the camera cards back to me and Jake Swanko and said, "Okay, you guys are my brothers. Let's do this." So, it was a long process building this trust. And the Turks were similar. While we were working with Hatice and back and forth between Istanbul and Montreal, it was, multiple layers and levels of the Turkish government that finally saw, I guess, an ally in me, somebody that they felt that they could trust, and that I wasn't there to disparage Turkey. And, look, Turkey's got its own human rights issues. It's got what some people consider a strongman president. And while all that might be the case, I spoke, to the Turkish government and, official after official, and said, "Look, I'm not here to disparage Turkey. In this case, you guys have been on the right side of history, and you are on the right side of history. And I'm here to tell the story of Jamal Khashoggi's murder. And if you'll allow me that access, you have my word that I'm not, I'm not going down other rabbit holes." And that trust eventually led to them, all those interviews that you see in the film where none of those other people have spoke on camera. That footage is still not released to the world other than in the film. The transcript is not in the world other than, through US intelligence and French and British intelligence. And so there's some real exceptional trust building that happened. And, I'm grateful.
Well, it's extraordinary how much you were able to capture between the different testimonies, between all the news footage and the other kinds of behind the scenes uh, footage that you were able to access. Tell us a little bit about what it took to shape the story in a way that's still really tight, very propulsive, but you still capture so many of the really important salient details. You had a team of editors working. What was it like building the story, especially as the story was developing as you went along?
Well, I think anybody can attest who's made a film. I am a director, I'm a producer, and a lot of times, all the accolades or the credit all of a sudden comes onto me. But it's really a team. I mean, I'm only as good as my creative team. And Mark Monroe, who helped me craft the script, and we worked together on Icarus, who's also a producer on the film, Thor Halvorsen, president of the Human Rights Foundation, who's producer on the film and backed the film, and Jake Swanko, my cinematographer, who also shot Icarus, who's a producer on the film. And then, we had 4 incredible editors working on the film at the same time, because we were under this real time constraint of like, okay, we gotta, we gotta push this along. So as Jake and I were filming in Istanbul, Montreal, London, Belgium, Zurich. I mean, we were on the road for a solid year. We're sending footage back to Los Angeles, and then, and then my editors are sending me, assemblies. And then, we had a huge graphics team that worked on the film, probably almost about 100 people. And, the credits of the film are probably, I don't even know, 300, 400, 500 people. So, this is a huge group effort. And I consider myself kind of the the master of everything and the master of nothing, because I have no idea how to create CGI animations, nor do I have any idea how to create a score. And my brilliant composer, Adam Peters. So you just surround yourself with people that share your passion and let them do their best work, and just try to help guide that vision along the way.
Well, let's talk about the animation a little bit, because you deploy it in a very interesting way. When you talk about the flies and the bees, and when you talk later about Pegasus, you use the animation in a way to visualize the scope of something that I think a lot of people might have a hard time wrapping their heads around, in terms of how big and how pervasive it is. Tell us a little bit about collaborating with the graphics team so that you could put that into place.
Well, I think in seeing the film, there's certainly probably a lot more graphics, animation, CGI, motion graphics, really kind of like some high concept, digital stuff going on, that you usually wouldn't see in most documentaries. And the reason for that is, we really approached it from the outset of crafting what we saw as a cinematic thriller. And there's all these elements in there, but I mean, this is all real. This is true. So you have this element of Pegasus and somebody's phone being hacked and communicating to other satellites and transmitting that information. So the concept is how can we make this feel real? How can we make this feel scary? And that idea of, bringing a phone apart and together and seeing where these traffic moves around the globe, was that concept. The bees and the flies, which, of course is, Omar had created the concept of we're the bees, right? The Saudi trolls are the flies. And that, in theory, took me a long time to really understand, and working with Omar, like really what were the Saudis doing on Twitter, and why was this so important, and how was this controlling the country, and how did these SIM cards work, and how did it work? And so the idea was okay, let's create, a CGI, really, high-tech animation of the bees and the flies, and show this Twitter war that hopefully will bring the audience to understand it, but create it, and we worked with ODD in New York, Office of Design and Development, Matthew Turk and Gary Breslin, and these guys did almost all the work on Icarus. And so here we were tasked with, this Twitterverse, basically the idea of, where you see Jamal and all this stuff happening in social media in the Twitterverse. There's the whole Pegasus sequence, the bees and the flies sequence. There's the point cloud sequence where we're using these Xbox cameras to create these holographic images of the Saudi trolls, and when they go to rendition Omar. And so the animations were actually, and then of course the whole transcript sequence of the murder. It was a big lift. And even though we had technically finished the film for Sundance, after Sundance, we went and did another 6 months of work on the film. And that work was all in basically animation, graphics, reshaping sequences that we were rushed to complete the score, the sound design, and so the film was truly only finished about 5 months ago.
Wow. And obviously, so much has happened in the global news cycle since then, too, especially, I mean, we are looking at the final few days of an administration that called the press the enemy of the people. We have him banned not only on Twitter, but on any number of other social media platforms. What is it about? It's almost as if Jamal's story is sort of the canary in the coal mine when it comes to showing all these warnings that only got worse because people either undervalued them or underestimated their impact. So how does his story and the story you told, how does it look different now that we know so much more about what's happening with the Republicans and with our entire news cycle and our democracy?
It's interesting, when right as Icarus first had its premiere, Trump was taking office, and the story, of course, was emerging of a Russian hack, and here in Icarus was this story of Russia completely for decades, creating an unfathomable fraud in sport. But it was also a story of how far Russia would go to cheat. And if they were willing to go to these measures to cheat in the Olympics to shore up national pride and power and show their strength, the question, of course, became, well, how far would they go in other things? And here we were faced with this situation as Trump takes office, and Icarus was like the conduit into it. And the marketing behind the film became this like consider truth and stuff, because even though the story is of Putin and this crazy scandal, it was also like it was shining a light into, wait, if they did this, is there any doubt as to whether or not they did this? And so here we are, on the cusp of the end of the Trump administration. And I think what was so shocking was to see here, of course, there was no accountability for Russia in our election hacking, nor was there any accountability really for Russia in the fallout of this massive global scandal of sport cheating. And in the story of Jamal Khashoggi, despite this incredible mountain of evidence, despite our CIA, British intelligence, French intelligence, all concluding with really beyond any shadow of a doubt that MBS ordered the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, we saw the Trump administration not only protect Mohammed bin Salman, but literally take actions to subvert any sort of justice in Jamal's murder. He vetoed bipartisan, House of Representatives and Senate passing legislation to block arms sales to the kingdom. He vetoed that. In the final days of his administration, he's trying to push through another $500 sales to Saudi. And he is trying to get the Justice Department to grant immunity to Mohammed bin Salman from prosecution in this country, be that for the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, or be that for trying to rendition another Saudi out of the U.S. about a year ago. So this is kind of been a shocking subversion of any sort of justice that has been clearly directed by the Trump administration. Even about 10 days ago, there was a reporting in the New York Times that Saudi Arabia had lifted the blockade of Qatar. And the back channel dealing of this was that Qatar bailed out the Kushner family on their building on Park Avenue in exchange for bailing out the building on Park Avenue. Kushner was able to negotiate with the Saudis to lift the blockade on Qatar. And this is all in the final days of the Trump administration. Now, Biden has said, at least publicly, and he said it a few times now, and he said it again on October 2nd, the anniversary of Jamal's murder, that if elected president, and of course he has been now, that he plans to hold Saudi Arabia accountable. He plans to re-examine this relationship. He plans to, take action. And there have been multiple stories emerging that the kingdom has hired, a ton of new lobbyists and PR and communications companies to try to prepare and strategize against what they are viewing will be a not so friendly Biden administration. So I guess time will tell what comes. But I remain very optimistic for Hatice and for Omar, but really more for Saudi's political prisoners. Lujan al-Hatul, the woman's human rights activist who's spent 3 years in a Saudi jail so far. Her crime is suggesting and tweeting that women in Saudi Arabia should have the right to leave their homes without the permission of an 18-year-old male guardian. And she's spent 3 years in a prison for this. She's just been sentenced to another 6 years in prison, simply for fighting for human rights and women's rights in the country. Osama Zamal, Jamal Khashoggi, is one of his best friends, economist who had the audacity to send a tweet suggesting that he disagreed with Mohammed bin Salman's economic policies in the kingdom. And not only Omar's brothers that remain jailed and his friends. There were 800 beheadings last year in the kingdom. And I don't think that there's any idea that there's going to be a trial and MBS is going to be held accountable in that way. But I think that there's a real optimism to be had that enough pressure can lead to some real change and some freedom of speech and thought and opinion in the kingdom if it's in their real best interest to do so. And Trump has, made it, not only admissible, he's condoned or not condoned, he's essentially, patted MBS on the back for his actions and looks up to him. So I guess time will tell. And I'm hoping that this will also serve as an ability for these big media companies and huge American and international companies to reassess their relationships. Because the film, The Dissident, is on paid video on demand right now, which is great because it's finally getting out there. And I'm being told that the film is actually doing very well, on the rental platform. But we really wanted to have a global streaming distribution that anybody has a subscription would be able to access this film around the world. And I think that the political situation, what has been going on under Trump, made that more difficult, because to distribute a film like this, in effect, was also taking on the Trump administration.
Right. Obviously, you're going to be working for a while still, it sounds like, on the outreach and distribution and the publicity, the promotion of The Dissident. But do you have any other projects sort of on the back burner that you're still really interested on? Or was there something that you really wanted to include in The Dissident that for reasons of time or clarity, you couldn't quite fit, but something that you still really liked about what you discovered?
In terms of the story of Jamal Khashoggi's murder in this, I feel like the film really is the story. There isn't like, I don't feel like, oh, I left 20 minutes, on the cutting room floor that really needed to be there. I wanted to focus on that story. I didn't want to go down all these other rabbit holes. And really have a call to action for the human rights abuses in this country, and to hopefully create a legacy for Jamal and what he was speaking and tweeting about. And here we are 2 years in, and nothing's changed. And so, I'm as far as in terms of the film, I don't feel like there's more there. I feel like there's a coda, and hopefully that coda is really meaningful change and some action that comes from, people being able to see the film and get behind it and speak about it and tweet. And I'm hoping that, all your listeners and viewers, just sending a tweet is powerful, as we see, in the film. Other projects, I've been quietly working on 2 other docs. One as a producer, the other as a director, both taking on, subject matter that I think people will be um, hopefully grateful to learn about. So I'm really just trying to continue that work. I have a scripted project in development, but that is surrounding, another kind of high-profile crime, true story involving, politics and kind of the stuff that I've found myself in. I see myself continuing this sort of work. I think that I'm always asked you, are you fearful of your life? I mean, having now taken on Putin and taken on MBS, and I never really think about that. I just kind of go, well, I'm grateful that I can tell these stories and that I get to work with these people and maybe I can make a little change in the world.
Right. Well, Bryan, thank you so much for joining us. It's an amazing movie, and it's really, really powerful, and we're really glad you were able to join us today. As a quick reminder, what's the website people should go to, and what's the Twitter handle that they should refer to?
Okay, so the website is thedissident.com, and you'll see, information there to take action to join basically the Human Rights Foundation's mailing list. You can go to Human Rights Foundation, hrf.org as well. And on the website, you'll also see information if you haven't seen the movie, where to rent the movie. It's on Apple, iTunes, Amazon for rent, like Comcast, DirecTV, like anywhere you can go to basically like watch like the new Tom Hanks movie. That's you'll be able to find The Dissident there. And my Twitter handle is Bryan Fogel. My Instagram is Bryan Fogel, and the movie is at Dissident MOV. Really appreciate the support. I've spent a lot of time in Marin. We actually did all the sound design for the film at Skywalker in Nicasio. Just such a incredible work that they do. I did Icarus there too, and honored to be talking to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Good luck with everything. Have a very safe 2021, and we hope to see you and talk to you again soon.
I hope so. Thank you, Sterling.
Cheers.
Be well.